Hello everyone, welcome back to week 4 of Intro to Game Dev. Today we're going to be working again with the Unity 3D tutorial, and we're going to add a little bit of scripting. Also, we're going to be working with the same tutorial project that we started last week with our protagonist, the purple cube. This time we're going to be adding a little bit of movement. So the idea is when we press WASD, or any key for that matter, I want our cube to move in these 4 directions to give us a little bit more control over what our character does. So let's get started. On our main character, we're going to go and create a script. So if you scroll down in the inspector, we're going to add component, and I'm going to type in SCR to look for a new script. You can type in SCR, you can name it whatever you like, but if you follow these naming conventions, it'll make your life easier. So SCR underscore, I'll call it player movement. Okay. And once you hit enter, it'll make a bunch of these scripts. Now, when you double click, and you can see that it already added it to your inspector. If for some reason it gets removed or you can't find it, you can take it from your assets folder and drag it onto either the hierarchy, the cube itself, or down in here. And when you double click, it'll open up in Visual Studio. You should already have Visual Studio installed, but if you don't, there's a video on how to do that in Canvas. Okay. Now, I just tried recording this video and I ran into a small problem. So if you type in Unity keywords like transform and you don't get this autocomplete message here, go ahead and do the following fix. So inside Unity, you're going to go to Edit, Preferences, External Tools, and the external script editor by default was set to Open by File extension. So what you want to do is you want to change that to the version of Visual Studio that you installed. So, and for me it's this version right here. Okay, and then you can click Regenerate Project Files, and then I would just cancel out of Visual Studio and reload it, and it should be fine. Okay. All right. So let's get back into Unity. Let's figure out a game plan. So what do we want to do? I said we want to make our main character move in these 4 directions. So if we think about that a little more analytically, what exactly does that mean? So let's say when I press W, I want it to move on this blue axis here. So when this blue arrow moves forward, you see that this Z number goes up. So if we think about that in the opposite direction, if I move this Z number up, it'll cause our cube to move forward. So that's exactly what we're going to do. One, we're going to access this cube's data. We're going to find this Z value, and we're going to increase it whenever we press a key, in our case W. Okay? Simple enough. If we hop into C#, or into Visual Studio, sorry, you might get intimidated by all this to start with. Don't really worry about it. We'll talk about it all later, but yeah, for now we'll just copy what we're doing. It'll hopefully all make sense. Okay, so this script right here, script player movement, you should see it's titled exactly what you titled it in the inspector. Since this script is placed on the object itself, we don't actually need to make a reference to that object, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So when I say something like transform dot translate, this right here, this translate function, if you might know from your math classes, translate means to move by a certain number in a certain direction. So this transform is basically accessing the component, the transform component of the object that this script is attached to. Since this script is attached to our main character, by typing in transform dot, it knows that we're talking about the cube. So let's say I wanted to instead get the transform of this plane. We could either make a script for the plane, or I could make a reference to the plane in this script. Okay? And we'll get into examples of that later, but I just wanted to make that clear. Okay? So transform, we're accessing our cube's transform component, and we want to translate it. And if you hover over this transform keyword, you can see that we got some error here. Red line, squiggly lines. And that's because in these parentheses, there's no method that takes 0 arguments, so we get to add it. It even tells us what it's looking for. It's looking for a vector-3 translation, so basically a direction to move in. So if we want to move in the z-axis, we need to wrong object. If we want to move our main character on the z-axis, we need to increase this third number while keeping these other two at 0. Okay? So if I type in 0, 0, and let's say 1, it'll move on the x-axis by 0, the y-axis by 0, and the z-axis by 1. Okay? And since this is in the update method, and you can see it kind of tells you here, and it also tells you in a comment, the update things inside the update method happen every single frame. And by default, every frame there are 20 frames in every second, so in theory we should be moving every second 20 units forward, or 20 meters if you like. Okay, and I'll hit Control S to save, and that should automatically load, and it should load into Unity, and we can see if it works ourselves by hitting play. Remember, our cube falls by default, and it flew off the screen because it's moving too fast. Let's try slowing that down to 0.1. Let's make it, oops. If I make it 0.1, all of a sudden 0.1 is not an integer, as you know, so we have to add f to indicate that this is a float value. Don't worry about that for now. But basically all I'm saying is I want it to move 10 times slower. Okay, so maybe we can actually see it. Okay, you saw it there for a second, it started moving. Still a little too fast. But what if I don't want to go into the script and edit this number every single time to change this? Well, we can use what's called a variable. And by that, I mean I want to be able to look here in the inspector and sort of drag around a number like this. Okay? So to do that, we're going to go up outside of these methods, but still inside the class of the script. Okay, I'll give myself some space, and I'll just say public. And so this is important because if it was private, or even if you just don't write public or private, it defaults to private, then you won't be able to see it in the inspector. So by typing public, I'll be able to see and adjust it in the inspector. I could make it, and then now comes the data type. I don't want integer because, as we know, 1 is already too big. So I'll make it a float value, and now a name. I'll call it speed. And now I can set it equal to a number. I can just say 1 by default, or I don't even have to set a number. Okay. So I'll copy this, and instead of having 0.1 here, I can just say I can move it by this speed variable. Okay? And now if I hit Control S to save, and I hop back into Unity, and I scroll down, all of a sudden, now in our script we have a speed variable with a little number. And now if I set it to, let's say, 0.05, which will be half as fast as the last test we did, there we go, it's speeding off into the distance. And it's also falling too. Okay, cool. Now one thing that is super important, if I change this from play maximized to play focused, okay, you can sort of see it moving there too. Now let's do a little experiment. If I set my speed to 0, it'll probably do as you expect, just it won't move forward at all. But actually, keep in mind we're still in play mode. I can change this speed, and I could just drag it too. Oh, yeah, see? I can control it. I can move this number in real time as we're testing the game. Now, keep in mind, watch this, so 0.58, if I stop our play, it defaults back to what it was before we hit play. So it's important. If you want to make permanent change to your game, you can't do it while in play mode. So remember that. Let's set it to 0.05 is pretty good. I'll make it even slower. I'll make it 0.01. Okay. All right. So that just moves our cube forward. But like I said, we want to move it whenever we press the arrow keys. So to do that, we're going to use what's called a conditional. So an if statement. We're going to test to see if something is true or not, and that is whether or not we're pressing these certain keys. Okay? So I'll give myself more space, and I'll say if and open some parentheses. And so basically, this format right here indicates, I'll copy this. So what if whatever I put inside these parentheses, if this is true, then it's going to run whatever is inside these curly braces. And if whatever's in here is not true, it's just going to skip over it. Okay, simple enough. If, let's say, input dot get key. Now you see there's lots of options here we can choose from. There's get key down, get button. The two we're going to look at is get key and get key down. So what's the difference? Let's read it. Get key returns true while the user holds down the key which is this parameter, which we'll get to. Get key down returns true during the frame the user starts pressing down. So let's say we're holding down, let's say I use my finger, I hold down W. Get key down will only activate this if statement one time because it returns true the first frame, start pressing down. Get key will keep this if statement true every single frame because it just says while you're holding down the key, it'll return true. And I think that's what we want. So I'm gonna double click that and say get key, open more parentheses because this itself is a function, and it's looking for a key code. So a key code is just another abstract data type. And you see it gives us a bunch of options here already. Spoiler alert. I'm gonna say keycode.w to indicate that I want to know if the user is pressing down the key W, is how you can think about that. And in that case, we want to move ourselves forward. So, and to make that a little easier to understand, let's add a few comments too. So you can see up here, by default, we were given some comments already, and comments are indicated by these two slashes. So we can say, and this is up to taste too, however, how many comments you write and how you want to write them, but this is how I like to do them. So whenever the user presses W, let's say another comment, move the player forward. Okay, perfect. Now let's give it a test. Okay, I pressed Control Save and that should work. Okay, let's hit play. Alright, so nothing's happening. If I press W now, we start moving forward. Now none of the other keys work, but we only told it to work when we press W, so perfect. And off the map we go. Okay, and now it's just as simple as copying and pasting to finish up our code. In fact, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to copy. I'm just going to paste this 4 times. And now, yeah, so you wouldn't really want to write all this out again if it's so similar, so I'm going to start with our comments too. So whenever our user presses A, that's a test for when we're pressing A. Move the player to the left. Okay. Now what does to the left mean exactly? Well, if I go back into Unity, let's see. Well, from this perspective, left would be moving this red arrow this way. And you can see that corresponds to a negative number on the x value. So instead of using 0, 0 speed, let's use negative speed 0, 0. And if you wanted, you can set your side speed or backward speed to be something different too, but just by creating another variable. But for our purposes, this will be fine. Okay, that's good for that one. Let's say whenever the user presses S, we're going to test if they're pressing S, move the player backwards, and this one's pretty simple. You just invert, our speed, so we just set it to negative. In effect, that'll just move us by a negative number on the z-axis. Okay, and then finally, test if we're pressing D. Test if we're pressing D, move the player to the right, and let's take, we went negative speed 0, 0. This time we're going to move by speed 0, 0. Okay, Control S, and that should be everything. Okay, let's give it a test. Alright, W, A, S, D. Perfect. And now our game feels much, much more alive. Okay, so that should be all. That should be enough for your first enough knowledge for your first homework assignment. Keep an eye out for that. We should have that posted by Monday morning. So you'll have a whole week to work on it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me as always.